Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Pamela. I'm a technical account manager at Google Cloud in Brazil, and I'm here with Pedro today, and we'll be presenting this session about provisioning and authentication models between Microsoft Active Directory and Google Cloud Identity or Google Workspace.
Hi everyone, I'm Pedro Souza. I act as a TAM, same as Pam, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you in this session.
Thank you, Pedro. So today our agenda will be talking about the authentication and provisioning models we have between Microsoft and Google, how to provision between Azure Active Directory and Google, and single sign-on with Azure Active Directory, and talk about the scenarios when we have multiple Azure Active Directory tenants. And at the end, we'll have some minutes for questions. So if you guys have any questions, you can type in the comment section and we'll reply them at the end. Or if we don't have the answer right away, we'll work on it on our web post. The blog post will come that follows this webinar. Thanks for joining us. So let's talk first about the authentication and provisioning models we have. The first model that's been working for lots of years right now is working with Microsoft Active Directory on-prem and using both directory sync and password sync to sync with Google Workspace or Cloud Identity. So for this, we use two tools. Directory sync is a tool that we have to install one per domain. So even if you have lots of domain controllers, you can have one in your domain to do the sync. But for password sync, we will need one for each domain controller that has writing permissions. So if you have lots of domain controllers and you want to sync password from on-prem, you have to password sync, use the password sync in each domain controller you have. So this is I would say the traditional way of doing this, and it's the one that requires more resources because you probably need a virtual machine or a physical server to install them. And it could also install inside the domain controller, but we recommend for directory sync it would be separate. So it takes lots of resources and it's I would say like outdated take on this. So I'll talk about more modern ways on doing this sync and not using so much resources. There is an option that when you have ADFS on-prem, then you can use directory sync to sync your directory and use SAML for authentication. That's a good feature if we can use SAML and have more power on what we want to sync, like attributes. And we can also choose where we want to sync this and have different SAML profiles for Workspace, and we will show that later. And if you have Azure Active Directory, we can use directory sync to sync with Google Workspace, and I'll also use SAML for authentication. But we have a new feature that's directory sync. Is like a second version of Google Cloud Directory Sync. And this is cloud-based, and you can use to sync with Azure Active Directory directly, and you don't have to install anything in your on-prem environment. So it's a new take on replication and syncing users. So some features that they have, it's cloud-based. You can support multiple directories. So with one Active Directory on-prem and 49 Active Directory on Azure. So it's up to 50 Active Directories in one console. So it's if you have like merges and acquisitions going on, you can have multiple domains only in one console. And you can connect directly to Azure Active Directory using VPN or Also, you can connect to using the internet directly to Azure natively. And also it has a feature for centralized reporting and auditing and can have everything in one place. And we have automation on schedule syncs. You can have like every 1 hour frequency, or you can set the time that you can have it sync automatically and not worry about having to go there and start the sync manually. These are some features that we have supported with Directory Sync. So we can sync users and groups from the directories. As of now, we don't have password sync. So consider that when choosing what we're going to use for the sync, but for users and groups, it works. You can choose on which organization unit you want to place the users to sync. So it's good that you can choose, for example, a group will stay in one OU and another group in another one. So it's simpler to choose where the users are going to be placed. You can also set safeguards on the sync. And you can also replace the domains while syncing your new domain. So we have this in the demo I'm going to show, but you can, for example, if you use a domain that for your email, but you have a new email, like a new domain inside Google Workspace, then you can replace the domain for the new one, and does automatically. So you don't have to worry on having secondary domains or like a proxy SMTPs on your users. It's easier to change the domain. There is a feature for simulating your sync, so you don't have to worry on maybe syncing more users than you need, and then you have to undo it, and it can be tricky if you sync like thousands of users. So you can simulate your sync before doing a production sync. You have an admin console with all the logs synced. Yeah, and also there's a feature that you can deprovision users and groups. So like what happens if you delete a group on-prem, for example, what happens if it's automatic deleted inside Workspace or not. And these are some upcoming enhancements we have. So mapping your standard and custom attributes from Active Directory, and also you can choose, we're planning on mapping every user to an organizational unit, because right now this placing users feature only works for groups and not like users individually. And this is a video that with the demo on how it works. So I'll play it for you. Just a second.
Connection. Directory Sync is a tool built into your Google Workspace admin console that allows you to sync your identities from an external directory, such as Active Directory. With the latest enhancement to this tool, you will now be able to synchronize identities from your Azure Active Directory as well. To get started, log into your Google Workspace admin console. On your left side panel, navigate to the directory and then select Directory Sync. To add your new directory for Azure Active Directory, click Add Azure Active Directory. Get prepared with the prerequisites, especially the credentials required to connect to your Azure Active Directory. You would need an admin account with a minimum privileges global administrator's role on your Azure Active Directory to read users' profile, groups, and its memberships information. Click Continue. Add a name to your directory and you can add a description as well. Click Authorize and Save. This would open a pop-up window where you can input your Microsoft Azure Active Directory admin credentials and authorize. Once authorized, in the same pop-up, you would need to provide a consent on behalf of your organization, as Directory Sync would be accessing your organization's user profile and groups information to sync to Google Directory. Click Accept. Once the connection is successful, you will get the confirmation as here. Click Continue. This is your directory homepage where you can find your newly created directory. Before syncing users, let me show you the users and groups available in the Azure Active Directory. This is the users which are available, and there are groups which contain some of these users added to these groups.
What you can sync between Azure Active Directory and Google Cloud Identity is based on your license from Microsoft side. So for some features, you have to have either P1 or P2, like Azure Active Directory premium licenses, because for free licenses, it still works for syncing, but you cannot sync groups. You can either sync users individually or your whole Active Directory. So if you're working with Active Directory licenses, you have to have that in mind, that you can only sync or all your users or select one by one, and you can sync groups. So if you want to add users to groups inside Google, then you have to create those groups manually in the Google Workspace admin console and add those users you've synced into that group. So if it's really a big company or like an issue for you, you should work with Microsoft on changing the type of license if you have to sync groups. So I'll continue the demo.
Let us start configuring the users which need to be synced. Under the User Sync option, click the Set up the User Sync. Under the User Scope configuration settings, you can add group names available in your Azure Active Directory which contain the users which need to be synced. Add groups with the comma-separated values. Click Verify. This verifies if the group exists in the Azure Active Directory. You can add up to 2,000 unique group names or 100,000 characters in total combined for all group names, whichever limit hits first. Click Continue. If you want the users to be placed in a specific organization unit post-sync, you can select the organization unit. You can as well enforce organization unit mapping in case if a user was manually moved to a different organization unit, then the subsequent sync would ensure the users are placed back in the selected organization unit. Click Continue. You can map the required attributes from your Azure Active Directory to Google Directory like first name, last name and primary email address. The default attributes which are commonly used are already populated, but however, if you would like to change the same, you can even do that. First name, last name and primary email are mandatory attributes. You can as well opt to fill in recommended attributes if required, like recovery email and recovery phone number. You can also choose how you want your users to activate their accounts by sending an activation mail to their primary or recovery email address, or choose not to send an activation email and find alternate means like configuring single sign-on for all your users. For configuring single sign-on, refer the Google Workspace documentation for detailed steps. Click Continue. You can configure the deprovisioning settings on how you want your users to be made available as active or suspended state in case if the users are out of scope, like user not available anymore in the newly synced group. You can suspend the user or keep the user stay active during the subsequent syncs. Click Continue. You can set safeguards to ensure if a percentage of users or number of users are suspended so that you can cancel the sync to avoid issues on your already synced users. Click Simulate Sync. Simulation helps in analyzing the changes in terms of number of new users to be created, modified or suspended. Once simulation is complete, you can click Close. You can activate the sync in the same step if you want to. For now, we would like to configure the group sync, and hence I would cancel and proceed to set up group sync. Group sync helps syncing the group attributes and its membership's information to be synced from your Azure Active Directory to Google Directory. In the Directory page, under Group Sync option, select Set up Group Sync. Under Group Scope, you have two options. You can sync all groups as available in your Azure Active to Google Directory, else you can selectively choose to add the groups. Adding a few groups now for syncing groups. If the group names are manually entered, you need to verify to continue. You can add up to 400 unique group names or 16,000 characters in total combined for all group names, whichever limit hits first. In the next page, you can map the attributes from your Azure Active Directory group details to the Google Directory. The default ones are already populated for your convenience. Click Continue. Similar to user deprovisioning, you define the rules to deprovision your groups in case if the group on your Azure Active Directory is deleted or no more accessible, on how you would like to manage the same in Google Directory. You can decide whether you want to delete the group in your Google Directory by keeping the checkmark enabled if your group on your Azure Active Directory is deleted, or remain stay active in spite deleted on your Azure Active Directory. Click Continue. Setting safeguards helps you cancel sync operations, especially when there is a number of groups or a percentage of groups are deleted. Click Simulate Sync. This lets you know the changes to the proposed groups and the group memberships, which helps administrators with details with respect to the next sync behavior. You can close and can activate and start the sync. For now, in our tenant, the source directory domains and the target directory domains are different, and hence, we need to configure the setting for domain replacement while users and groups are created. Under the home page of the Azure Active Directory, select the global settings and configure the option for email domain replacement. To enable, you need to checkmark the option, automatically replace the domain and email addresses with the domain selected below, and choose any of your primary or secondary domains as registered under your Google Workspace. You can as well choose the option below for your upcoming sync choices, which helps you replace domains to already synced users and groups or to the newly synced users and groups from the next time sync happens. Save the setting. Activate the sync by switching on the sync. The sync can take some time to sync the users depending upon the total number of users, groups, and its memberships. Once synced, you can find that your users and groups can be found synced under your users and groups spaces. Once sync is successful, the next time the sync would be triggered automatically after 1 hour from that time and would continue similarly running the background, ensuring the identities are synced on a regular basis from your Azure Active Directory to Google Directory. Thank you for watching this demo and looking forward to you starting syncing your identities.
Okay, so just let me go back to the presentation.
Welcome to this demo on directory sync, focusing.
Let's move on provisioning with Azure Active Directory. So have some more videos and demos showing how to do it. But the first step when we think about syncing users, we have to go to Azure Active Directory in the Enterprise Application session. And we have two approaches on this. If you have a look in our documentation, we recommend that you should have one application for the user sync and one for single sign-on. But there are some cases that people use the same enterprise application, so you can explore both choices and see what's easier or you think it's safer to maintain. And you can, in this video, we're gonna have a demo on using one application for both cases. Oops. You're gonna use two applications, you can put the name like single sign-on and provisioning so you can know which one is which. I'll just move on here. So when the application is ready, then it will move to the properties page, and we have to copy those attributes on the application ID. We will have to use them to configure the environment later. And after we create the application, then we can move on to mapping the application and the scope of the provisioning users and groups. So we go to the provisioning section of the section of the application, and we go to get started. And the provisioning model should be changed to automatic, and we add the admin credentials to authorize the communication between Azure and Google. And to do the sync, I'll just pause it here. So as we said in the previous video, you have to have permissions on both sides. So on Active Directory, you have to have an account like a global admin. And on Google side, to connect to and create groups, you can either be a super admin or a user and group administrator to do this. So we recommend that if you can, you give the lowest permission, like being just user and group manager to do the sync, and not super admin, because then you have permission to do anything on Google side. But you guys can check on the documentation and see all permissions we need on both sides. But you just have to read carefully what will be like the least privilege you can give to do this, especially if it's an account that many people have the password. So we recommend that this account for syncing is just used for syncing, and you don't have to use it for anything else, and you keep the password somewhere safe so people won't make mistakes or use this on day-to-day basis. So when you click on authorizing, to check if you have permissions to do the sync, and then you will click on test connection, and we'll test if the user has the right permissions. And when it goes green, you can start the mappings. So in mappings, as I said before, so I'll just go back here. We have the option of provisioning users and groups. And if you have Azure Active Directory free license, you can only provision users and not groups directly. So, but if you have P1 or P2, you can do groups as well. We'll work on how to provision users in this video. Sorry, how to provision the groups. And we use the attributes here, as you can see, like the mail. So the mail attribute on Active Directory side will be the email attribute on Google side. And you can also change this, like you can check on like UPN and emails. We can change some attributes depending on what you have on your Azure Active Directory side. But at least you have to get the display name, the description, and members and email on groups. And then we have the attributes on users as well. And when you create the attributes for provisioning users, the main we need is user principal name that is associated with the primary email on Google site. And those three you can't delete. So user principal name, surname, and given name are attributes that we always need to have at least. And the others you can either delete or use, but we need at least those three attributes to be synced. And here we're just showing that you can use other attributes like a company or other attributes you have for syncing. And there's also an expression option that you can have the input there and associate the attributes based on this expression. And you can have a look at the documentation on this expression builder to understand it further. But just have in mind you have at least the email and name will be great and will work. So there's an option to send an email when a failure occurs when syncing. And also we have the option on marking the prevent accidental deletion as it happens on Active Directory as well. So you can put a number on accidental deletion there, a threshold. And once you save there and you enable syncing, then the users will start syncing. We have to choose which users are going to map our groups. So we set there on, you have to select the scope. So you can either have syncing all users and groups, so that will sync your whole Active Directory to Google, or you can choose to only assign users and groups, as I said. So you can choose which users and groups will be synced, which is better because sometimes you have like thousands of users, but you won't just want to add, for example, your IT admins to work with Google Cloud, for example, and you don't need to sync thousands of users, and it's easier to manage if you don't have to do it. But if you have a larger environment, like all your company is going to start using Workspace, then if you have to sync everything, then it's easier and you don't have to scope this and select the users. So just check what suits better your scenario. So this is the next video we're gonna have, is about adding the users. Just a second. So here we're gonna provision one account, and so if you go to provisioning settings, and you can see all the users and groups you want to add, and we go to add user or group. So as you see there, the message talking about the plan for your Active Directory. So in this case, we're using a free account and we can't add groups, so we have to select just users. And it talks about what kind of license you need to do this. So it's suggesting that you can either have a E5 or a P2 to select the groups feature on this menu. Go ahead and select one user. And if we want to force a sync, like not based on those hourly syncs, we can manually provision one user, like in this case. So we added him and went to on-demand provisioning, and we select the user, so it will be like instantly synced with Google, and we'll show in the Google admin. So here the user is not there, and then we'll just provision it and it will show up very quick. So if you're in a hurry, I need to add users immediately, you can use this provision on demand feature. This is a log that shows when we perform the sync. And as we can see, the user is synced now. And now we're going to move on to single sign-on and the features we have when syncing and using single sign-on between Azure Active Directory and Google. So we use SAML authentication to do this, and this video is going to show how we enable this feature inside the enterprise applications. In this case, as I said, we're using the same application, and we need to save this application ID and object ID and everything from the application side. And we go to single sign-on and enable it as SAML. And we will start by filling those basic SAML configurations, and you folks can have a look at the official documentation. And the reply URL, we have to just copy it from our Google admin, and it has to be your primary domain. So you have to edit the URL there and add their domain. And for the sign-on URL as well, you have to get the info. And on the step-by-step in our documentation, you can find the details on doing this. So in the sign-on URL, you can just copy the pattern and change as well the domain in the URL there, and it will work. And the other options are optional, so you can just save there. Then we can go to the attributes inside the SAML configurations. And we can actually delete all the additional claims we have and just keep the unique ID, like the UUID, as the required claim. We don't need all those. I mean, we can use, but we have to be careful about those, because we've seen some cases that there are some additional claims that can impact your syncing. So if you have any additional claim there that has email involved, it can conflict with the UUID when it has a different value as the email. So we recommend you just keep the required one. So after we have the attributes and the SAML configuration, we'll have to download the certificate from the SAML certificate and copy the login URL and the Azure Active Directory identifier and logout URL to configure in Google admin side. So we have everything copied, and we go to the admin console and go to authentication and single sign-on with third-party IDP, identity provider. And we'll create a profile. So if you don't have one yet, you create a new one, or you can edit the one you already have, or you can have also multiple SAML profiles inside one identity inside Google Cloud. So we go there and replace the certificate with the certificate we downloaded from Azure Active Directory. And also added the change password URL if you want to use Azure to, like if you want to change your password, you can redirect the page to Azure's change password page. And with that configured, the SSO is already created, but we can have multiple profiles, as we see here. And we can also link it to an organizational unit, like we're showing there. So you can assign the SAML profile to, like, the first option that's selected there is for this organizational unit called tested.foscloud.com.br. Then you can also assign to a OU, or you can assign it to your whole organization, or you can have one SAML profile for each organizational unit. What works best? For example, if you have multiple domains, you can have one domain as a primary and many secondary domains, and each user from this tenant syncing to that organizational unit. You can have a profile for each company if each domain has its own tenant and its own Azure Active Directory tenant. So what works best, and you can have a look at the options, and we're going to talk about multiple Azure Active Directory tenants in a minute. So in this case, they have one profile for the whole organization, and in another OU, they have the profile he created, and you can also have none. So after we've done all this, we can validate that the SAML authentication is working. I just copy the URL for Google account and type in the email that you sync the user from Azure Active Directory, and it should redirect you to the authentication on Microsoft 365 page, and you put the user and password. If you have a token or anything, it will work just as if you were logging into Microsoft's page. So if it's working, then it should redirect you back to the Google page, and everything is working now. You can see the applications, and it also works for Google Cloud, for example, if you're using this sync to work with Google Cloud. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the multiple tenants that we can have. Different scenarios when you have different domains inside Azure Active Directory, and if you want to sync all of them. This is the first example. So you have two different Azure Active Directory tenants, and you want to sync it to Google Cloud Identity, and you can link each tenant to a Google Cloud Identity. So you have one-to-one relation, and from that you can have Workspace products or Google Cloud Platform, anything you want to do. You can have this for each tenant on Azure. You can have one identity inside Google Cloud, or we can also have multiple tenants syncing to only one Google Cloud identity organization, and you can also have single sign-on and SAML profiles, as I said, so each domain can still keep their single sign-on features and applications and everything. And for that to work, you have to choose which domain is going to be your primary domain and which domain is going to be your secondary domain. That doesn't change anything. All users can still use all the features, but you have to choose. You can't have more than one primary domain, so you have to choose which one is going to be your primary, and the following domain should be added as secondary domains. And it's still going to work everything. All resources from Google Cloud or Google Workspace are going to work the same way. So you have to think if you want everything centralized in one console with all domains, or if you want it separate, or if like the companies are still managed by different groups or teams. So you just have to think what works best, but both options are supported. So this is how it works when we have the Active Directory with Workspace with two Active Directories. So you have both of them with the directory sync. directly into Workspace, and SAML authentication for both with one identity, like one organization and Google Workspace called identity. And this is just a demo on how it shows in the admin screen. So we have there different accounts. And we go to the single sign-on for third party, and we'll choose a different SAML profile for each domain we have. So users from each domain will be redirected to their own Microsoft authentication page. And for this to work, we'll have to configure the right URLs there for each SAML profile, have its own entity ID and ACS URLs. So otherwise, if we don't configure this properly, maybe different domains will be forwarded to the same Microsoft page. So you have to pay attention that for each domain you sync, you have to copy the right info from Azure side, and then each tenant will be directed to the right authentication page, because we've seen that a lot, that sometimes we have a profile set at the top of the organization on Google side, and they forget to assign these URLs inside each profile. And then if then it will get the default from the organization, and then users from company B will be redirected to company A, and it starts to get messy. So you just have to pay attention to setting the right URLs inside the profile. It's just a demo on accessing the resources on a secondary domain, but it should work just as the primary domain. As I said, it doesn't matter which domain is the primary and other secondaries, they all work the same. And that's all we had on content for today. So I'm gonna have a look at what we have for questions here. Let's see. I'll work on the questions we had already submitted through the registration form, and then we're gonna move on if there are questions inside the comments section. So the first question we got is it viable to use Google Cloud Identity as a hub to synchronize users and groups with Azure Active Directory or other providers? So it depends on what is your main goal on syncing users, because if you already use all your applications and resources are in Azure, for example, and or your on-prem environment, and you're just going to use Google to access resources like Google Cloud, then you have to think that maybe changing the identity provider to Google is going to give you more work to do, and maybe it's not the best option. But if you're thinking on moving everything you have to use like Google Workspace and all servers, domains, VDI, and everything inside Google, maybe it's a good option. But you have to study what's your scenario and if it's worth using Google as your main identity provider. So it has to be carefully chosen, because it can get complicated managing identity provider if you use your resources mostly somewhere else and not inside Google. So about the directory sync tool, we have a link here. I'll just open it. So we have this comparison on what's the difference between the GCDS, that's the previous version of our direct sync, the syncing tool, and the new tool. So we're gonna type this URL in the comments so you can open it later and have a look what are the differences between them. But the main difference is that the GCDS required on-prem software to be installed, and on directory sync we can do it in the cloud. And another thing that I said in the beginning of the presentation, so GCDS works with many LDAP directories, so just not only Active Directory, but also Open LDAP. And Directory Sync only works with Microsoft Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. So it's mainly focused on Microsoft users. And the GCDS works on-prem and the same network as your LDAP server. And with Directory Sync, you can use VPN or interconnect to access your environment on Google Cloud. So it doesn't have to be on-prem. And as of now, GCDS can sync users, groups, calendars, external contacts, and passwords. And Directory Sync still only focused on users and groups. Maybe if in the future we have more content coming to this, like more data types can be synced, you can always keep looking the page and see if anything's updated. And another main difference is that GCDS can't sync from multiple external sources, and Azure and Directory Sync can work with Azure Active Directory and on-prem Active Directory. But you can check the URL and see more differences we have. And the second part is like, how do I map users to a given organization unit structure? We showed in the demo video that in the process of syncing using the directory sync, you can choose how to map a user or a group to a organizational unit. So you can go just back and look again the video. So I'll go to the questions here on the chat. Let's see. There is, does Active Directory at mobile differ from computer? I don't know if you can give more details. Let's see. Let me see the question. I don't know if you, no, we didn't answer. So I don't know if you understand like mobile Active Directory, or if you meant like using, can you guys hear? Let's see. Go back to comments. I don't know if I understand, but if you mean like syncing, you can have mobiles as a resource on Active Directory and on Azure Active Directory, but I don't know if you meant MDM, but if you can clarify your question in the comments, maybe we can get more details, but there is no, I don't think there is a difference we can mention about that. So how are aliases provisioning this type of synchronization? I don't think there is any difference on the way it's synchronized the aliases. If you mean like the UPN or I don't know, how are aliases? Because The sync is the same, so we get like the user and the surname and the UPN. And also, if you want to get the another attributes like SAM account name or other attributes from Active Directory, it's going to sync the same way. It doesn't change from what we had with CDS and directory sync. Let's see. To sync between Azure Active Directory and Google Sync, a VPN is not required. Yeah, you're right. You can sync between Azure Active Directory and Google using only the internet. You don't need a VPN to do that. Okay, let's see this one. Thank you for this. Any plans on Google Workspace and to AWS Directory Service? Yeah, as of now, we don't have any information on like roadmap for directory sync to use AWS Directory Service, but just we'll keep you updated if you look in the product page. Maybe in the future we can have that feature, but right now you can't. So can exclusion rules be created for OUs? Do you know this, Pedro? If we can, I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think we only for all users, like, I don't know. Do you know this answer?
Yeah, I was only replying here in the chat. So far, Javier, we don't have this capability yet, but we don't also has visibility on the roadmap. Talking about directory sync, right? Because in GCDS, yes, we can create these exclusion rules.
Yeah, thanks, Pedro. So yeah, and GCDS hasn't been deprecated yet. So if you want to, if you need this feature for exclusion rules, you can still use GCDS. And in the future, maybe we hope that this will be implemented into Direct Sync before GCDS is deprecated. So sometimes we still need to use GCDS, but we hope that in the future we can have everything inside Directory Sync. And Google to Active Directory write back would be nice, a feature for GCDS Directory Sync. We had some customer ask about it. Yeah, we don't have a write back feature yet, and I know that many people ask about it, but I don't think it's in the roadmap for having this feature for write back. But we hear that a lot. Thanks for the feedback, and I'm sure the product team knows about it because lots of people ask for this feature, but for now, I don't think we have that in the roadmap as well, but we'll keep you updated if it comes up. Well, I think that's I think with all the questions we had. The guy, let's see if a new comment. Yeah, well, no extra comments. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, thanks, folks. Thanks, Pedro. And I forgot. Let me share back my screen just for the last slide. Just a second. Oops. So we have a last slide here, just talking about the resources and what comes next on our webinars. And so we have the Google Workspace community, and we have also the Google Cloud community. And it's great if you folks join so you can have updates on our products and forums, questions, and these webinars and other events. We also have a feedback form. So if you want to share any feedback on the sessions or suggest any ideas for future sessions, it's very welcome because we use this feedback to come up with new content and have new sessions and also blog posts about them. So if you could share what are your interests and what you want to see in the future, just go ahead and a quick feedback. I hope you feel it. And also we have some upcoming events next week. Actually, we have first sessions for October. We have AI readiness on October 4th. We have tips and tricks on getting the most out of Workspace with AppScript on October 6th. We have Google Security Office Hour. So we're going to talk about Chronicles on October 11th. And on October 25th, we have a session about security, privacy, and risk in Gen AI. I hope you all enjoying the session. So hope to see you next time. Thank you, Pedro. And
Thank
see
you
you
all.
folks next time.
Take
Bye
care.
bye.
Bye bye.